I'm Lukas. I'm a member of the Ensemble Nobiles. I'm singing Bass-Baritone in the group since 2009.
My name is Marc. I'm the tenor of Ensemble Nobiles, and I'm a member since the autumn of 2023.
Please tell us a little bit more about the history and the founding of the Ensemble Nobiles and what inspired you for the creation.
Oh, well, I wasn't a founding member. The group exists since 2006. I had to listen to the early rehearsals because my office in the St. Thomas Boys Choir boarding school was next to the room where the group rehearsed. And they and we are always quite ambitious with our repertoire. And in the beginning, that meant loads of rehearsals. And for the first years, I thought, never I'm going to join. And then after my A-levels, I came back from England and they made me drunk. And I said yes. And since then, I'm singing in the group and never regretted it because it's a brilliant way to continue making music.
Yeah, and Ensemble Nobiles, as Lukas somehow already mentioned, was founded as, you could say, an offspring of the St. Thomas Boys Choir, so a very well-known boys choir with a very old tradition. And the first members of this group were all students in the St. Thomas Boys Choir boarding school, and they just thought that singing all together in school isn't enough already. And so this group formed. And, 20 years later, almost 20 years later, here we are, yes.
Mm-hmm. And how would you describe the ensemble's music style?
Oh, good. No, we try many things. We do early Renaissance. We do Renaissance in general. We did Machaut. We did Josquin. We did Tallis. We do. Then, I mean, in the Baroque era is a bit of a gap because there is not much literature for male choir. But then from the Romantic onwards, we did loads of Mendelssohn, loads of Romantic literature, Leipzig-based literature, Reger. There was this huge resurgence of male choirs in the Romantic era, so loads of repertoire there. We do also a lot of contemporary music, church music, mostly. So we come from a sacred background, church choir background. So that's kind of one core of the ensemble. But we do also folk songs, and recently we delved into kind of the Schlager style songs of the 30s and 40s, like the comedian harmonists, but not the comedian harmonists. Very important distinction.
Yes, and we also try to adapt many songs for our voices. So, of course, we also have some chorals by Johann Sebastian Bach in our repertoire, which was originally written for mixed-voiced choir, or probably even the St. Thomas Boys Choir, but still with high sopranos and whatsoever. And we adapted to our voices, so we still can sing some of this repertoire. And there are also many composers, contemporary composers, who compose specially for us. So there are certain pieces, especially the one that we brought here to Australia, that were composed and commissioned by us. They were commissioned by us and then sometimes even composed by us, because Paul, our countertenor, does a lot of composing as well. So that's also kind of our repertoire.
And is that right? You are all musicians in different projects, or are you all only dedicated for the Ensemble Nobiles?
That's very individual because we all, as is often the case, you can't live of making music alone. So we all do other things as well. I am working in customer service for Edition Peters, so I'm working in publishing. But other members are also freelance musicians outside of Nobiles.
Mm-hmm. And how do you maintain a balance between the individual artistry and, let's say, the sound of the Ensemble Nobiles?
That's a question I can't answer because I'm not doing that.
Well, maybe I will try, because I am one of the two members of Ensemble Nobiles that studied singing at the Hochschule für Musik in Leipzig. Me and Ben, who is the other member who also studied with me, our baritone, we already sang in many other choirs or ensembles on a quite professional level. So sometimes, of course, you have to adapt to the sound of the ensemble, but then again, you try to use your professional voice that you try to train during your studies, and try to fit in the ensemble sound. And well, one could maybe say that there is some balance between the solistic singing voice and the ensemble voice, but I don't necessarily think that, because I would more consider myself just a singer, so not only an exclusive choir singer or ensemble singer or an opera singer, but with my voice I try to sing just any kind of music. And well, for Ensemble Nobiles it took me some time to really fit in the sound, but after a few months we found a nice way for me to still sing with my vocal technique and still fit in the sound. Well, it worked out quite well.
Okay, so you would say that as an ensemble you really try to bring the best out of each member?
I'd say so, but I think it's a bit more than that. It's not just it's not 5 individuals singing, but we try to, as a group, have a sound together and make music together more as one than as 5. That's always kind of a negotiation thing on stage, but I think therein lies the excitement in what we do, that you have the tension and the music making on stage with 5 individuals that then come together to make one sound. And I think that's also a reason why it takes time for new members to come in, because we all have to adapt to each other. And yes, of course, we can sing concerts together. That's not the question. The question is, how do we sound? How do we react? How fast can we do music together on stage spontaneously? How far back can we take a piano? How far forward can we bring a forte and stuff like that? So that's kind of a constant negotiation that needs a lot of listening to each other and a lot of training with each other, and trust to be able to do that on stage. And that takes time and development. And that's what we always are working on, and which we also try to teach in workshops that we do.
Oh, great. You do workshops?
Loads, yes.
Tell me more about those. What kind of workshops are they?
Okay.
Yeah, we try to work with choirs or other ensembles as well. And we've been in Melbourne 10 years prior, and already then we did a workshop with this school. And so we try to get the singers a little bit more focused on the things that are important to us in singing. So as Lukas already mentioned, listening to each other is quite important. And so our kind of motif is singing with your ears somehow. Yeah, it's kind of our motto. Well, most choirs and ensembles are really glad to learn about that. And in the end, I would say that they really sound different, and one could even say better. Even if it's just an hour, we could work with them, yeah.
Can I ask you about the world-famous Thomaner Choir, the St. Thomas Choir? Can you tell us a little bit about it, what it is, and what it feels like
as a child to go there?
Okay, that's definitely my part. The St. Thomas Boys Choir is although it's the oldest cultural institution in Leipzig, founded on the 20th of March, 1212. It's over 800 years old, meaning the school, the church, St. Thomas, and also the choir. I think it has you have in many different cultures, you have this tradition of boys' choirs in churches. And there's a very distinct one in England, and you have this kind of a German tradition, which is a bit different. For myself, it's one of the best ways to learn how to do music as a kid, because then you don't learn it by being taught that's how you do it. You learn it by making it as a kid, and then it becomes intuitive, which is brilliant. One of the most famous conductors of the choir was Johann Sebastian Bach, but there were so many other great musicians on that post, and it's always been one of the forces in music in Leipzig. Of course, Leipzig is famous for so many other things in music as well, but I think one of the seeds for that was this choir and the school that taught students to read and how to make music, and they then went on in their life to continue doing that, and so that became kind of the seed that then blossomed in the music city that is Leipzig. We have other choirs in Germany as well that do kind of the same thing, but of course the Thomaner are the best.
Of course they are. So did you feel quite privileged to be part of that choir?
Well, as a kid, I mean, I joined when I was 9, so you don't really realize what you're doing. It's just you said yes, and it sounds fun, and you live together with your classmates and friends, and that's brilliant. And somewhere along the way, you realize what you're doing. But our cantor used to say, Cantor Biller, we are nothing special. We are doing something that's special. I think this is a very important distinction, especially in puberty, growing up, being regularly on tour, going to Japan and, have in front of buses, like screaming girls and stuff like that. It's really weird. Having every week buses of tourists coming to St. Thomas for the cantatas in the afternoon. Of course, all that can get to your head really, really easily. And I think that's a very difficult balance to then somehow don't become very arrogant. I think if you're the type of person who benefits from an environment in a boarding school, and you are a bit musical, that's an ideal environment. I really enjoyed living there. I really enjoyed growing up there. Yes, of course, you have your phases where you think it's all rubbish. But, you're in puberty. You have that anyway. And I didn't have them with my parents, which saved me a good relationship to my parents. I loved living this, and I think the lessons I learned there, I could never get them somewhere else.
And would you consider Mr. Biller as a father figure?
Not as a father. Kind of a spiritual mentor more, or like a role model in many ways, in the good and in the bad, because he was a flawed human, as we all are, and as a kid you really pick on the stuff that's not good as well as the good things. The best things only in retrospect, when you realize, oh God, that's him, that was him, or he did what he did, and now I understand why he did what he did. But the flaws you see immediately, as you do, and so that's why never a father, but a role model in things, how to do things, but also how to not do things.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about the Bonhoeffer project. What is that? And who was Dietrich Bonhoeffer? What does he mean to you?
Bonhoeffer was a priest that was also in the resistance. A Lutheran priest, and he wrote several books, some on ethics, even though, and those contents are still quite valid. And I think he is most remembered for two things: being in the resistance and being the author of some very famous texts, because he also wrote poetry, especially in prison. And the song Von guten Mächten, which is the hymn for New Year's Day in the Lutheran Church in Germany. That is one of those most famous poems. And our colleague Paul had the idea to commemorate his death. That the first time we tried to commemorate it in 2020, the 75th anniversary, but then 2020. And so we're now in 2025 doing it for the 80th anniversary and also combining it with 80 years end of Second World War. And the whole project, I think about the project you can say something.
So this project is a big international project, or it became even more bigger. It became even bigger and more international with the time it grew. So it is a big mass that we commissioned with the text of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and we commissioned certain motets, so certain kinds of his texts to different composers all over the world. So we have Australian composer, New Zealand composer, US composer, British composer, and a German composer, who all were given those excerpts of texts of Dietrich Bonhoeffer, and they composed something for mixed choir, so a big choir, and us as ensemble, 5-part ensemble. And then we wanted to kind of sew this together as a mass, and so Paul, our countertenor and musical director, he composed the Latin mass in between those motets, and kind of really musically sew together this big piece. Now we are touring through Australia, and also wanted to bring this project to New Zealand, which didn't quite work out, but we will still go to New Zealand, and we have this big event in May in Leipzig, where we will do this mass again with the Gewandhaus Choir, and also the Sydney Chamber Choir, who was the first choir here in Australia, will come to Leipzig and perform this piece with us, and also maybe some people of the Melbourne Ensemble Gombert. And around this concert alone, there will be a symposium, there will be other different things that commemorate Dietrich Bonhoeffer and his work and his life. So there will be also events on the concentration camps. So it will be a whole festival. And we are really proud that this all in the end worked out and became as big of a festival as it's going to be.
Wow, I think it's absolutely amazing. And I can hardly believe that you managed to pull that all together, because this is really... it's a very, very hard task. Yeah. So, how much work, love, and everything went in there? Can you describe it?
I think we have to ask Paul mostly about that. Our countertenor, because he is kind of heading the whole thing and organizing the whole thing. It's loads and loads of work, and still is loads of work, and the most difficult part is to not get the artist support or the commissions, but the money. And especially in these times, in Saxony and Germany, we don't have budgets at the moment on state levels, so we don't, city, state levels don't know what money they have to fund things like that. So we got very often told, oh, that's a brilliant project, we would love to fund it. We can't fund it because we only will know in later this year what we could have given you, which then led to the project shrinking a bit, sadly. Yet we still tried to pull it off as much as possible because we think it's really, really important that we do it. The message is more relevant than ever of the whole thing, and collaboration amongst artists, amongst international people is so important, especially these days, where everyone wants to focus on their own, which never led to something good. It's worth doing a lot of it, and also now that we know how it sounds, because up to the first performance we didn't. So the concept was there, the idea was there, and we had the scores. But before our first rehearsal in Sydney, we didn't know how the pieces would sound with choir, only with piano. And that worked brilliantly, and suddenly the pieces made sense. And then after the first performance, we knew that not just is it brilliant music, but it's really emotional. It's bringing the message across, even though we premiered it for English-speaking audiences. And most of it is either Latin or German, and even that there were no dry eyes in the audience, and that's kind of what we want.
That's what I wanted to ask. How did the audience react, and what did you expect them? How was that met?
Well, I wouldn't quite say that we really had an expectation. Of course, we all hoped that it would somehow work out and that the audience would just like it. But I think that our expectations weren't just matched, they were surpassed, yeah. Because the reactions of the audience were quite overwhelming. They came to us after the concert, and well, everyone was just so amazed by this beautiful and so deep piece of work of art that we just created, and that they were just witnesses to listen to. And I'm still out of words, as you can tell, because the reaction was so overwhelming, even for us. Not only by singing it, but also the audience's reaction were just, really overwhelming. I didn't hear any critic voice in a bad way. It was all, they were all just amazed, yeah.
That's right. I can absolutely confirm that. I still have goosebumps when I think about it. And listening to it, yeah.
At one point that I found very astonishing, that the choir singers came to us afterwards and were saying, I had trouble keeping my composure doing that piece. I had to fight my tears. Which I think that was, for me, also a very important point, that not just the audience that is just consuming it, but also for the people who make the music, that this deep emotional connection. And that's one of the aims of the whole project, that that we would do it with many different people, with many different choirs, and have this reaction shows that we are very right in doing so. And props to Paul for composing music that made it possible to have those 5 very good motets, but they are very individual, very unique in their own style. And Paul made it so that it's a whole thing. It's a cohesive evening, and that's very impressive and very, very difficult to do. And yeah, we managed to do that, and I can't wait to perform that in Leipzig as well.
Wow. Artistically, how free were the composers that you commissioned?
Okay. Quite. the first, so the commissions went out, and we had a selection of texts that we wanted to put behind every part of the Mass, mostly from Prayers for Inmates by Bonhoeffer. And the first one even could pick and choose the text in which they wanted to compose, except for Von Guten Mächten, which is the last part that went to Manfred Schlenker, because he already, we knew him and the Schlenker motet via a motet he composed for the Thomaner Chor ages ago, and we performed. And we asked him if he could do a motet for this, for choir and us. And he immediately said yes, and he was the first one to finish, also because he was 92 and said, I don't know if I lived that long. But no, he did. That was, and that's the final piece of the motet as well, of the Mass as well, which is very, very impressive. And so the other composers came into line. We only had to ask one composer to switch texts, because there were, of course, people who wanted the same texts. But yeah, even in the language, they were quite free. We only said, okay, we need 3 to 5 minutes, maybe a bit longer, mixed choir, vocal male quintet, our ranges, this text, and you can choose the language the text is in. If you want it in it doesn't matter, we will take care of a translation. And so some motets are in German, one motet is either in German or in English. And one motet contains the first Bonhoeffer translation into Maori, which is
very interesting.
Very interesting.
This is by the New Zealand composer.
Yeah, David Hamilton. He wrote. He kind of made us sing the Maori texts, and the choir sings the German text. So we have the translations next to each other, parted only by the different ensembles, which is really lovely.
Yeah, beautiful, and a very wonderful statement as well. How was it to work with the other choirs? Are there cultural differences, or what happened?
I wouldn't necessarily say that there are cultural differences. Well, of course, people all over the world, and everyone is different. So, but then again, when we first came to Sydney to first have this project be done with the choir and had our first rehearsals, of course we didn't really know what to expect, but then again, most of you already knew Sam Allchurch, the conductor of the Sydney Chamber Choir, and worked with him already, I think, yes. So of course we had some talks about the musical things beforehand, but just in working with the other choirs, I wouldn't say that there's necessarily a big difference or cultural difference at all, no.
We all laugh about the same stuff.
Okay.
Let's talk about where you come from, Musikstadt Leipzig. So you come from Leipzig, which is, I heard it before that it was called Berlin Light, because it has many cultural events, but it's much cheaper in the cost of living, which makes it really attractive for students today. Would you say that too?
Absolutely. Well, I wouldn't really say that it's Berlin Light. But then again, I think it was the New Yorker, the famous newspaper, who once titled Leipzig the New Berlin. And there are other newspaper articles quoting Leipzig Hypzig. Because I think that especially for younger people and somewhat more alternative folks, Leipzig has become quite more attractive, even more in the last few years. And I'm not originally from Leipzig, but I now have been living in Leipzig for more than 10 years. And even in the beginning, and still, I found it quite interesting to be part of this experience of a really still growing city. In Germany, this is quite rare, that you have a city that grows by the by 10,000 a year, and still is. And well, especially in the means of culture, there are so many things you can do. Of course, especially the music background in Leipzig, with the big Gewandhaus orchestra. And the opera, Musikalische Komödie, which is our operetta and musical house. We have the St. Thomas Church. We have this big musical history with Bach, but also with the publishers who used to and still are in Leipzig, used to be there and still are in Leipzig. And well, the big Musikhochschule, the college for music. This is what got me to Leipzig. So I studied singing in Leipzig, and actually I don't want to leave anymore.
I think that's true for most of us, because none of us is originally from Leipzig, but we all moved there and stayed there for very good reasons. And I think I always think the comparison to Berlin lacks a bit, because Leipzig has its very own character. And I always say Leipzig is big enough so you have all the conveniences of a big city. You have the cultural offerings, you have a free scene as well, you have bars, restaurants, you can go out, you have the big international exchange as well, you have the students. But on the other hand, it's small enough so you meet people on the street when you go out, and feels quite familiar in that. It's, we are now at about 630,000 inhabitants. Which is a great size for a place to not feel overwhelming. But yet you have, just on the Augustusplatz, you have two big symphony orchestras, the Gewandhaus Orchestra and the MDR Symphony Orchestra. You have several choirs. A few years back, there was the German Choir Fest in Leipzig, and they discovered that Leipzig has over 300 choirs. And it's... I think Leipzig is a very open, because of this university as well. It's a very open city. We have the fair with the Leipzig Book Fair now also coming up end of March, which is just amazing how many people come into the city then, and the city is building hotels and still there's no room. It's lovely and it's very livable. Leipzig has been titled one of the best livable cities in Europe. I think mostly due to living costs, which have been rising constantly. So a few years back, moving was actually fun, because you just went to a viewing, and if you liked the flat, you said, "I'll take it," and then you got the papers, and that was it, and you didn't have to show anything. Those times are over. But no, it's a great livable city, and just the music history is quite impressive, because in the 19th century, everybody who did something with music had a connection to Leipzig. Most people went to university, because Mendelssohn founded the first high school for music in Leipzig. So many composers were there that later became famous, and musicians that later became famous, because it was just the place to be as a aspiring musician. Then, of course, the publishers. So, when you were a composer, you studied in Leipzig. Some were born in Leipzig, or you were published in Leipzig, and you were performed in Leipzig because of the Gewandhaus Orchestra. So the Gewandhaus does this thing in programs where they say on a page when this piece was first performed by the Gewandhaus and last performed, and now this performance. And very often in standard repertoire, the first performance is the premiere in the Gewandhaus, which is quite impressive. It's to have this huge history that doesn't start with Bach but predates Bach, and doesn't end with Bach or with Mendelssohn but goes on. It's a huge heritage which is brilliant to get inspired by and to draw from.
Thank you. This is really, you could work for the Leipzig tourist office, I'm sure.
Leipzig Tourist and Marketing GmbH, hi.
Oh my God. This is the second stay in Australia, and it is exactly 10 years ago that you also sang at the Goethe-Institut in Melbourne. Do you feel that there has much changed in those 10 years?
Absolutely.
What?
Sydney has a tram. The last time we were there, there wasn't really public transport. Now there is, which is brilliant. There could be announcements where one is in the trams and especially in trains and in the buses, because especially buses don't stop everywhere. So I had to find out on Google Maps when to get out. But anyways, I really enjoyed that. Melbourne seems to have been exploding in this time. I feel like the number of high rises doubled in that years. But in general, it's as beautiful as I remember.
All right. So what were the highlights of your stay?
Well, for me, this whole journey was a big highlight because I'm the newest member, as we already talked about, and so it's my first time to Australia. So everything here was a big highlight, but then again, I think for me especially, it was on the one hand, of course, this big musical project, which was really, in lack of any other words, amazing. But just considering the country, I really love the nature and yes, just the view out of my window in Sydney and in Melbourne. It's just astonishing, this beautiful nature and just escaping our very cold German winter. The birds, yeah, the birds, they sound quite different to German birds. And it's yeah, as a musical guy, there are these small things that really bring joy to me.
About those birds, it says, somebody said, like in Europe, like in the old Europe, the birds were singing and here they were screaming, like shrieking. And,
well, I can somehow relate to that, but then again, I find it quite funny because in front of my window here in my accommodation in Kew, there are birds. I couldn't really find out what they are called, but to me they sound like old modems.
There's one in Sydney. There was one that always sounded like a Star Trek door.
Yeah. Woo!
Captain Bridge.
So that was your musical inspiration here in Australia. The birds, how lovely. I'm sure you've heard the comparison that Melbourne would be a bit like Berlin, whereas Sydney is a bit more like Munich or Hamburg. Did you hear that? And what do you think about that?
Well, we were comparing those two cities to American cities. So we actually said that Sydney is kind of the Los Angeles and Melbourne is kind of the New York.
Oh, wow. Oh, well, that's good. Being a Melbourne girl, I can perfectly relate to that.
Yeah, because, well, it seemed to us that although I really like both cities, I can't tell anything else, and that you could still see that there's a different vibe in the city. So the people in both cities, compared to German cities or other cities I've been to, seem much more relaxed. This is the first impression I got. But then again, I think there hasn't been an hour in Sydney that I just went through the streets or we drove by car that we didn't pass at least 10 joggers, and 5 of them topless. And well, of course, they are fit guys. They are, yeah, but it's a little bit Los Angeles. They want a little bit of show off. And then, yeah, I think that Melbourne seems a little bit more artistic, sometimes even sophisticated. It was just my first impression. I don't know if I'm right, and I don't know.
And also, I would say Melbourne feels a bit more real, when Sydney feels quite a bit superficial. Superficial. Yeah. I mean, yeah. Sydney is... It's awful how beautiful it is. Yeah. The nature is just you know, driving through the harbor on a boat is one of the best things you can do. It's just beautiful. But I've got the feeling people have to keep up with that beauty, and they don't, and they lose kind of. I don't know if they lose anything, but it's a bit intimidating going through the streets in Sydney. Whereas in Melbourne, it's more enjoyable because you see real people, not thousands Chris Hemsworths.
Oh, thank you. We leave that uncut, please. So how was the project financed in the end?
So this tour is partially financed by what we earn with the concerts, but also the Goethe-Institut gave a big sum, which we are very grateful for traveling. And also the Sydney branch has a flat which we could stay in for the time, which is brilliant because you don't you save on hotel costs, and it's also far more comfortable because you have a kitchen and a laundry, and with 20 kilos of travel luggage for 3 weeks, that's really important. So yeah, we are very grateful for the cooperation, for the continuous cooperation and support by the Goethe-Institut, because that's not the first time, and I hope it won't be the last.
Thank you so much for your time, for your interview, for that beautiful, lovely project, which is, it is a project of my heart.
Well, thanks for having us, and thank you that we could be here and talk to you about ourselves, which is what we most like, but also about our beautiful projects. And just thank you. We are very grateful.